Thank you all for coming. Really thrilled to have you here and to have Nick Fish here today as the President of American Atheists. He and I first met 7 years ago when he was brand new in his president role and I was brand new in my president role. It was pre-COVID, and we met for brunch with a number of humanists at Cody's here and haven't seen each other since. And then I had heard that he was a key speaker last week at the Reimagining America Summit and that he would be on the West Coast for a while, so we just took advantage of the opportunity to have him come up here and talk to us. He's a seasoned civil rights activist and a civil liberties activist. And since you just came back from that Reimagining American Democracy Summit, can you share your perspective? What did you share there? What did you hear there? What should we be aware of, particularly this time, which is right between the Juneteenth and the 4th of July, the 250th anniversary of American independence? He's going to invite us to reflect on the nation's founding promises, as well as ongoing work to ensure true liberty for all. How do we strengthen institutions? How do we deepen participation? How do we build a more just and inclusive society? I also want to mention that at that summit, it was hosted at a Unitarian facility at the Pacific Unitarian Church in Rancho Palos Verdes. And it was also hosted by American Atheists and Atheists United out of Los Angeles, who partner with us from time to time. Nick Fish, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, and for the incredibly kind and generous introduction and welcome. So, as Judy said, I'm going to be talking a bit about American democracy and this project that we have of reimagining what that means in this moment. But first, I just want to thank all of you for being here. It's not nothing to drive out, to decide that you're going to come in on a day like today that is absolutely beautiful. Judy said they were going to take advantage of my being on the West Coast to be here. I feel like I'm taking advantage of the hospitality of Santa Barbara just being here because it's so beautiful. It's such a luxury to be up here. A bit of a different vibe than my current hometown of Philadelphia or where I'm originally from in Michigan. So I really do appreciate the generosity and the hospitality, especially of the Live Oak Unitarian Universalist congregation and Melanie for making the event happen and for all the logistics. So thank you for that. I mention all of this of, you making the decision to be here, making the choice to think about how we're going to strengthen our democracy for a very important reason. Because we're living in a moment where the very powerful are doing everything they can every single day to make us feel smaller, to make us feel hopeless and powerless and alone. They're doing everything they can to stop us from showing up. But you did. You showed up today. You're showing up for American democracy. You're showing up for your neighbors. Because the point is that we're not alone, no matter how much they want us to think that we are. We're not just hoping for something better. We're not just imagining what better might look like. We're actually working toward building it. We're putting in the hard work that it takes to build a better future. Judy mentioned, and I think you probably saw on the advertising for this event, that we're going to be talking about reimagining America. And that's what I've been talking about throughout my trip here on the West Coast. It's what we talked about all day at Rancho Palos Verdes at the Reimagining America Summit. And we had another event actually a few weeks ago in Philadelphia, again in my hometown, arguably the birthplace of American democracy. These events that we hosted brought together advocates and activists, politicians and community leaders, people of conscience from across the religious and belief spectrum. We all came together to think about what might come next, what the next 250 years of American democracy could look like, to imagine the future of this American experiment. The summit happened at, I think, a really notable hinge on the calendar. Judy mentioned it actually. A few days after Juneteenth. That was the anniversary of the day in 1865 where the promise of the Emancipation Proclamation finally reached the people in Texas who had been denied it the longest. And now, next week, we're marking the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. That's the time that we're standing in right now, between those two moments in history, those two moments on our calendar, between a promise made in 1776 and a promise that was kept far too late, between remembrance and reimagining. And that word, I think reimagining for us can seem a little strange right now. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about why that's exactly the right word that we should be using, and I want to be honest about why that really matters right now. 250 years ago in Philadelphia, a group of people gathered together and did something that was audacious. They didn't inherit a government from those who came before them. They weren't granted it by a king or a pope or a holy book. And there's kind of an irony there, because a lot of people talk about the founders, talk about the framers as if they were prophets who were handing down stone tablets from on high to us as future generations. But they weren't. They were in many ways architects. There were no plans for what they wanted to build. So they sat down, they argued, they debated, sometimes very vigorously, and they drew something up. They looked at the world as it was, a world of kings and established churches, a world where the wrong prayer could get you imprisoned or killed. And they imagined something that had never existed before. They imagined something that hadn't ever happened. They reimagined what was even possible in the first place. And then they drew up blueprints for what a world might look like based on that imagination. And then they got to work actually building it. 100 years later, on the 4th of July in 1876, the centennial, the great freethinker and orator Robert Ingersoll stood up in Peoria, Illinois, and talked about what the founders built. He said that they'd created the first secular government that was ever founded in the world. The first government that said every church had exactly the same rights and no more. That every religion had the same rights and no more. The first secular government in the history of the world. That was a reimagining. That was innovation. They didn't create, as some people would want you to believe, a Christian nation. They created a nation instead that had no business telling you what to believe at all. They knew, as Ingersoll put it, that to put God in the Constitution was to push man out. That was an act of imagination before it was ever a law. But that imagination, that reimagination, didn't stop in 1776. They knew that the blueprint they drew up was not finished. And the people that created those blueprints were flawed. They were limited human beings. They drew up plans for a structure, blueprints for a building that was bigger and more generous than they themselves were willing to be. They made promises that they themselves were not prepared to keep. They wrote things like, all men are created equal, while holding other human beings in bondage. They imagined a democratic republic and then restricted that democracy to a mere sliver of the people who lived in it. The promise they drafted was bigger than what they could or were willing to actually build in the moment. And so every generation since has inherited the same job, the same calling, if you'll excuse me, and the same obligation to pick up those drafters' tools, to look at the world as it is, and to imagine, reimagine, and then build something closer to that promise. We cannot think of ourselves as caretakers of a finished building. Instead, we have to think of ourselves as architects, like they were, of the next 250 years. And what we're tasked with doing is reimagining what is possible. There's no better illustration of that unfinished work than a speech that was given in July of 1852. Frederick Douglass, who had been born into slavery and who'd taught himself to read in defiance of the law, who'd escaped to freedom, was invited to speak at an Independence Day celebration in Rochester, New York. And the people who invited him there expected a certain kind of speech for that 4th of July event, a sort of patriotic speech. The kind that maybe flattered the audience, patted ourselves on the back, celebrating the nation's birthday. That is not the speech that Frederick Douglass gave. He stood in front of that audience and he asked them a question. He said, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July? And then he answered that question. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by the founders, he said, was shared by them, not by him, not by the slave in bondage. The sunlight that brought light and healing to them had brought stripes and death to him. The 4th of July, he said, is yours. It's not mine. Let's think about what Douglass was refusing to celebrate in that moment. He was not rejecting the idealism of the Declaration of Independence. He was not rejecting the principles of liberty and equality. Just the opposite. He was refusing to celebrate a country that had written those principles and then refused to extend them to millions of human beings held in bondage. He was refusing to let the country congratulate itself on a freedom it was actively denying. He was holding up the promise of America in one hand and the reality of America in the other, and demanding that everyone look at the distance between those two things. That distance was not an abstraction to Douglass. It wasn't an abstraction to the people who were still being held in slavery. And that distance is not an abstraction for far too many Americans still today. But what happened next in Douglass's speech, the choice he made, is really important. After all of that, after that searing indictment of American hypocrisy, Douglass said that he did not despair for this country. He drew his hope, he said, from the great principles of the Declaration and from what he called the tendencies of the age, an increased interconnectedness where injustice had nowhere to hide, and the popular movement toward abolition that was bending the arc of history toward liberty. That is what it means to be an American, holding the country to its own promises, telling the unsparing truth about how far short it still has fallen, and refusing all the same to give up on it because you believe it can be made to mean what it says. Douglass didn't want a smaller America. He didn't want this hand that held the promise of America to move closer to the reality. He wanted to move the reality closer to the promise. He wanted a bigger America, a truer one where the promises were made real. And then, even then, just a few decades after our founding, Douglass was engaged in a project of reimagining, the work of perfecting our union. And that's the inheritance that we have today, our obligation to the future. Now, I want to say something here that might be a little controversial, something that might be uncomfortable for people. But I think it clarifies why I'm here talking about reimagining America. The white Christian nationalist movement understands this moment and the stakes of it, I think, in some ways better than we do. They might be calling their events things like Rededicate 250, but they're not simply defending something. No matter what they might say, they aren't trying to preserve some status quo. They're not even trying to return us to a prior status quo. Despite all of their big talk about protecting our nation's heritage or their fealty to the founders' ideals, that is not what they're doing. We have to call what they're doing what it is. They are engaged in a project of reimagining America, a sweeping, ambitious, well-funded vision for what this country is, what it should become, and who should count as a real American within it. They have a picture of the future that they want to build. They are organizing around it, and they're building toward it every single day in courtrooms, in state houses, school boards, and now at the highest levels of our federal government. Their vision for this country is one where there is an in-group and there is an out-group, where your rights depend on your beliefs, where one narrow strand of one specific religion gets to speak for all of us, write the laws for all of us, and decide which of us really belong. They will tell you that they are simply restoring something, but make no mistake about it. What they are describing is not a return to anything. It is a reinvention. It's a reimagining of America as something it was never intended to be, something it was explicitly designed never to be. We have to call out their distortions, absolutely. make it crystal clear that they are lying about our history and about our present, that they're even lying about the future that they want to build. But if we only play defense, if our entire posture is predicated around preserving and protecting what we have, then the most we can ever achieve is losing it more slowly. Have our rights slowly chipped away. The foundations of our democracy eroded away inch by inch. And I don't know about you, but that is not good enough for me. We have to have a vision, something that we are trying to build. They most certainly do. It's a horrifying, divisive, ahistoric, and brutal vision for our future. But it's a vision that a small but powerful group of Americans believe in and are working every day to implement. So we need to have a better one. A vision that embraces our biggest ideals rather than shrinking them down. One that grows our democracy rather than limiting those who have a voice. One that celebrates our differences instead of fearing them. We need a vision that allows every person to bask in the warmth of Douglas's sunlight, allowing that sunlight to bring light and healing to everyone. We need to be unapologetic about having that vision, shouting it from the rooftops, contrasting our vision with theirs. The good news, and I promise there is good news here, is that our vision is better. It's more honest, it's more generous, it's more popular. It's more popular with everyday Americans because it is more American. We just have to have the courage to claim it. So what does it mean to make that promise real in our time, 250 years after the founding, and for the next 250 years? I think at its core, it means having a democracy that actually responds to the people who live in it. A government that isn't just nominally of the people, but genuinely answerable to them, where ordinary people can participate in the decisions that shape their lives, and where that participation actually can change outcomes. Now that sounds pretty basic, right? It sounds like the thing that we're all taught in school that democracy is. But let's be honest here. That is not the country that we are currently living in today. And it's not an accident that it isn't. There are powerful forces in this country that are deeply committed to making participation harder, not easier, to making our government less responsive and not more. Because a democracy that responds to all of its people is a threat to those who are benefiting from the status quo. Those who benefit from a government that responds only to the desires and the demands of the few. We're living at a time in this country of income and wealth disparity that is unmatched in American history. The world's first trillionaire. Meanwhile, last week, I spent 5 hours packing and distributing 7,000 pounds of food to our neighbors in Los Angeles in partnership with Atheists United. And Atheists United is going to do it all over again next month. Why? Because people cannot afford to put food on their tables. We're seeing concentrations of resources so extreme that a small number of people now have the power to drown out everybody else. That inequality doesn't just stay in the economy, though. It's seeping into our democracy. When a handful of people and corporations can spend unlimited amounts of money to shape our laws, capture our courts, flood our politics with their preferred myths, then the voices of ordinary Americans seem to get quieter and quieter. Money becomes a megaphone for the few, drowning out the voices of the many. The result is a government that is perfectly responsive to its donors and deaf to everybody else. And that is connected directly to this project of reimagining America. The same concentration of wealth that is hollowing out economic opportunity is bankrolling the campaign to redefine who counts as an American. It's no coincidence that the same movement that is trying to shrink the circle of belonging is often funded by the same people who benefit most from a democracy that doesn't respond to ordinary people. In their view, an exhausted, distracted, divided public is easier to rule, easier to dominate, which is a core part of the white Christian nationalist ideology. Reimagining a responsive democracy, one where participation is real and not for sale, is how we take the country back from the forces willing to bet that we won't do it. So here's the situation we're actually in. There are two competing acts of imagination on the table for the next 250 years. Their vision and ours. And the question I'm calling on us to answer is not, will we defend the past? The question is, whose imagination is going to win the future? I would be doing you a profound disservice if I pretended that this was a fair fight, or an honest one. The vision that white Christian nationalists are trying to sell really can't survive first contact with the truth. So they just don't tell the truth. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars, corporate money, dark money, increasingly your tax dollars, to lie. To lie about our history, to lie about our present. They lie about our history when they tell you that America was founded as a Christian nation. They lie about your history when they say that this was one nation, founded one nation under God, and it always will be, like the White House tweeted out yesterday. We know it wasn't. The men who built this government built the first secular government on earth, and they told us so, in plain language. Madison warned that the same authority that could establish Christianity could just as easily establish one sect of Christianity over all others. And he understood that once you give the state that power, no one's conscience is safe. They also lie about our present. They wrap their movement in the language of religious freedom or religious liberty while using it as a weapon, to discriminate, to exclude, to carve the country into people who belong and people who don't. They stage taxpayer-funded prayer events and call it patriotism. They tell the nearly 1/3 of Americans who claim no religious affiliation that we are not really part of that story. They look at the actual breathing diversity of this country: Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, humanist, atheist, and they call it a problem to be solved. Here's what they're counting on. They're counting on the fact that most Americans don't know our own history. They're counting on the fact that we have collectively a low level of civic, historical, and religious literacy, and that into that empty space they can pour their myths, their lies. But those lies only work in the dark. They only work if they have that space to be poured into. So our first job, our first task as part of Reimagining America, and you'll see it in the programming that American Atheists does with our partners and with our allies, is to turn on the lights. And when you turn on the lights, here is what you're going to find. Their ideas are not popular. They're divisive, appalling, and they know it. That's why they need hundreds of millions of dollars to sell that idea, to build their own media ecosystem, to try to hide the truth, to try to hide their actions from everyday Americans. That's why they need to capture the courts instead of winning votes. Because when their actual agenda is put in front of actual Americans, when people see what one nation under God and no one else really means, they reject it. The cruelty does not sell. People being ripped from their homes, pulled out of their cars, does not sell. Everywhere their vision is put to a fair test, it fails. A movement that has to lie about the past and lie about the present, that has to spend a fortune and capture institutions because they can't win hearts, that is not a movement that is winning the future. That is a movement that is desperately afraid of it. Underneath all of these fights, I think, is a single question. Who counts as an American? Their answer is narrow. To them, an American is somebody who was born in the right place, who looks a certain way, who worships a certain God in a certain manner. Everybody else is just a guest. Tolerated, maybe, conditional acceptance, here on sufferance, one election or one Supreme Court decision away from being told, go back from where you came. We reject that answer entirely. Not just because it's wrong, but because it's cruel. It's a lie about what this country actually is. We know that being an American is not about where you were born. Some of the most American people I know that have ever known this country took the oath to become a citizen as adults. They chose this country on purpose, with their eyes open, in a way that those of us who were born here never really had to. Being an American is certainly not about what you look like. The face of this country has never been a single color or looked just one way. And people who tell you otherwise are lying. And being an American certainly is not just about whether you believe in God or what religion you follow. Many of us here today are atheists, humanists, secular in some way. We certainly don't believe that the loudest voices in this country get to tell us what we are supposed to believe. And we are not one iota less American because we don't believe the way they want us to. Americanness is bigger than any one of those little boxes. It's a set of commitments. It's a willingness to participate in this strange, difficult, unfinished experiment in self-governance. It is having a stake in each other's freedom. It is a choice to keep building on the promise, even when the country hasn't kept its promises to you. By that measure, and many others, Frederick Douglass was far more American than the men who held him in chains. By that measure, the people who stand with us in this fight, whether they're atheists or humanists, believers of any kind standing shoulder to shoulder, we are carrying on the American story. We are carrying it forward right now, better than any Stephen Miller or Steve Bannon or J.D. Vance could ever hope to. And it eats at them. They hate it. And I want to go even one step further about what it means to be an American because it really matters, especially here in a place like California. Americanness is not even limited to citizens. There are people in this country who are not citizens, who may never become citizens, who are nonetheless woven into the American story in ways that cannot be cut out. These are our neighbors, our friends, our loved ones, our community members. Immigrants and dreamers who came here, many of them fleeing exactly the same kind of persecution that our founders built this government to prevent. And they are living out the American promise more faithfully than the people trying to slam the door in their face. They are a part of us. Their labor, their hope, their courage is part of the American story, whether or not they have an American passport. And right now, I don't think they would necessarily want one of those new passports with Donald Trump's face on them. So a vision of America that erases those folks is as much a betrayal of our values as any attempt to erase us. When the question is asked, who counts as an American? Our answer has to be bigger, more generous, braver than theirs. Because the promise of America, the blueprint that we're working from, has always been that. People will always often tell me, you atheists are just against things. But I think we all know that's not true. And in this moment, I want all of us, whether you identify first as an atheist or a humanist or both, I think it's important for us to push back on that perception even harder. Because what we have to do is not just be against the story the white Christian nationalist movement is trying to sell, we have to be telling a better one. So let me tell you a few things that I am for, and I hope you are too. I am for the actual founding promise of this country. A secular republic where the government takes no sides in matters of conscience, where every belief and every non-belief stands equal before the law. I'm for a democracy that responds to all of its people, not just the ones who can afford to be heard. I am for the reforms and structural changes that will make it easier for people to be heard. The changes that will make our democracy more responsive to the needs of our people, to ensuring that every American has the opportunity to cast a ballot. I am for reimagining what our government looks like from top to bottom, starting here in our communities, at the local level, to our states, and all the way up to Washington, D.C. I am for conceiving of democracy that is not just something that happens to us from Washington or from Sacramento, but something that we build on our own streets, in our cities, with our neighbors, with our mayors, with our city council members, and with our school boards. I'm also for a pluralism that goes beyond mere tolerance. Tolerance says, I'll put up with you. I think we all know what that feels like. What we are building has to be bigger than that. An active, demanding, tough pluralism, where we don't just coexist, we actually show up for one another. So I am for reimagining pluralism, taking it from a mere tolerance to a conspicuous solidarity with the people who are under attack by our government, where a room full of atheists and humanists stands up for the religious liberty of Jews and Muslims, and where people of deep faith stand up for the dignity of the non-religious. I am for taking the time to do the hard, practical work of building community, where everyone belongs, even if we don't always agree, where we celebrate those differences, where we acknowledge that those differences strengthen our democracy rather than undermine it, where we do those things not despite our differences, but because we share the promise of this country, and because that promise only works if it's genuinely for everybody. I am also for reimagining our public school system. I am for choosing to invest in our nation's schools to ensure that every kid has access to a quality education. I am for deepening our understanding of our history to ensure that the lies of the white Christian nationalist movement don't go unchallenged, to ensure there is no more space to pour their lies into. And when confronted with the decision about whether the next generation inherits the truth or the myth, I am for choosing the truth, even if it's uncomfortable or inconvenient, warts and all. I am for realizing that this reimagination of our country isn't just for those of us who are sitting in the room today or for those of us who are alive today. I am for understanding that this reimagination belongs to all of the people who will come after us. So I am for including young people in our activism, listening to them, empowering them, lifting them up. They are not going to wait for our permission to start building the future that they want. So we damn sure better not get in their way, because it's coming. The architects of 1776 looked at a world that had never seen a secular republic like the one they were building, and they built it anyway. The abolitionists looked at a country half enslaved and refused to despair because of it. The suffragists looked at a nation that had never granted them full citizenship and demanded it. Leaders in the civil rights era looked at promises unfulfilled and demanded that we live up to them. Every generation that made this country freer did it the same way, not by inheriting a finished America, but by reimagining it, by looking at the blueprints left behind by the last generation and expanding on them, imagining what the future could look like. And then they did the work to build what they imagined. But it was never finished. And we have to be okay with the fact that our vision will never be finished either, at least during our lifetimes. But that work is now ours. The blueprints are now in our hands. Blueprints that we are free to edit and revise, walls that we can tear down and replace, plans that we can build on or expand. The other side has their own set of blueprints. They have started the work of building from those blueprints. And they are betting that we are too tired, too divided, too discouraged to build our own. I don't believe that. And I hope that you don't either. I think about the people that I've spoken to in this trip to California, but also to the volunteers and the advocates and the people we work with all across the country. Not in quote unquote blue states like California or Massachusetts or Colorado, but in really, really tough states. States like Mississippi and Alabama. States where it feels like a struggle every single day. States like Texas. I talk to those folks and I know that the white Christian nationalist movement is wrong. I know that we are not too tired, too divided to get things done. They might have hundreds of millions of dollars on their side, but we have the truth. We have the people. We have each other. They are betting that they can use their money to wear us down, to overwhelm all of the things that we have going for us. They are betting that they can exhaust us, grind us down. But there is one thing that I know after more than 15 years working with this community. We are stubborn. We really keep at it. We do not let the fact that the other side has more money than us or a decades-long head start on us, we don't let that discourage us. Instead, we look at the world as it is, and we dare to reimagine what a future could look like. And then we get to work building it. Because that's what it means to be an atheist and a humanist in this moment. That's what it means to reimagine our democracy in this moment. Thanks all. Take your questions. As Judy said, if you come up, there's a mic right here, just so the folks in Zoom can hear you. Folks in Zoom, if you have questions, make sure to put them in the chat, and I'll sort of alternate back and forth as we go.
Yeah, any questions?
Yeah, if you're able to come up, that's great. If you're not, I'll be happy to repeat your question as well if you're not able to come up.
Okay, well, there was a group of dedicated people who came up with Project 2025.
Yep.
Do we have a dedicated group of people who are working on what we need to do, specific bits of legislation, specific plans? I have the feeling that we all have an agreement, but that we don't have the plan.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. What I'll say about that is, short answer is yes. The longer answer, though, is the other side, the white Christian nationalist movement, one of their defining characteristics is their love of authority, sort of a top-down, my way or the highway approach, where they all get on board because they recognize that it protects this small group of people and that the rest of us are going to be crushed beneath the heel of this movement. We are, in many ways, working with a much more difficult task. Part of building a pluralistic, secular democracy that is representative is that sometimes, we lose the argument. But we're talking about structures that can survive those losses. And so if you're asking, do we have a Project 2029? We are working on that. But also remember that Project 2025, it sort of came out in 2024, late 2023. So we're still working on these things, but yes, we do have to have a plan. We can't just pretend for a moment that we can stumble our way forward and solve all this stuff. And when I'm talking about reimagining democracy, a big part of that is arguing over these plans. Debating these plans, doing it out in the open, because the thing about the Project 2025 stuff, that all happened in a, pardon the like smoke-filled room at the Heritage Foundation somewhere, where people just said, here's what we're doing. That's it. But it glosses over a lot of the disagreements that those folks had, because they found like a few things that they could agree on, and then from there it was a bit of a mishmash of, we're going to do all these different things to preserve our power, entrench that power. And so, do we need to be organized? Do we have to have a plan to respond? Absolutely. But that's what building and reimagining the structures of our democracy looks like. It's not just enough to say, okay, we're going to undo that. We're going to rip the name off of the Kennedy Center. We're going to, not do this ballroom or whatever. We're going to pass one law. I think a big part of what we have to be honest with ourselves about is where are our current structures falling short? We have to have an expansive reimagination of what is possible and make the argument. And sometimes that's going to be really difficult. It's going to be scary because we're looking at these structures, as flawed as they might be, and we're saying, well, we want to start something fresh here. We want to try something completely new. And so states like California, many of these states are like innovating on, people always call states sort of laboratories of democracy. The problem is many of those laboratories of democracies look a little bit more like, Frankenstein's laboratory right now, where they're spewing out monstrosities. We want to use those laboratories to build something better, to do the sort of, scientific research, to extend this metaphor to a breaking point, that grows the pot, that grows our democracy, that is, the kind of laboratories where cool discoveries come out that we're really excited about. And so that might mean things like adjusting or changing the way that we do elections, whether it's first past the post, so you have one member that you elect, or whether it's ranked choice voting, or whether it's multi-member districts, things like that, to make the democracy more responsive and not being afraid to try things. And so there are big things that we need to do to fix damage at the federal level, but one thing I'll say about that is it's always a lot harder it's a lot harder to build something back up than it is to tear it down in the first place. Because so much of their ideology is about tearing down something, they're able to move that very quickly, where it's a lot harder to build something back up. And that's sort of the burden that we're stuck with. But we have to be honest with people about the limits and aspire to something bigger and say, this is what we're going for, here's the vision. Is that what you want? And I think if you lay it out in stark terms, if you're honest with people, most of the time people will agree with you and say, yeah, that is what I want. I want a more inclusive democracy. I don't want my neighbors being ripped out of their cars and their cars left running in the street because they've been abducted. I don't want people kicking down the doors at 4 a.m. and pulling, children in pajamas out of their house. That's not what we want. But that's not enough. We have to talk about something bigger than just, I don't want that.
Who is the we?
The we.
I mean, I give money to ACLU, I give it to Citizens United, I give it to Southern Poverty Law Center, I give it to numerous other organizations, but they're just, what I see is them just fighting and pushing back. I don't necessarily see them as organizations who have come together to come up with the reimagining. So when you keep saying we, who specifically is we?
Yeah. And so I'll point to a historic example here, because I think what you're talking about is a very real tension that we sometimes feel in grappling with this moment, that we do have to fight back and sort of be reactive, but we also have to be proactive, and we have to do the longer term investing in the structures of our democracy. And I think that, thankfully, a lot of folks, a lot of the groups that you've named, I know, because we work with them as well, are working behind the scenes. And this is something that you are not going to see. And it's not something that you're going to be able to point to right in this moment and say, we've got this put together. You don't need to look much further than the civil rights era. And you can, or even the LGBT rights movement from the early 2000s as well. That there was organizing happening behind the scenes. There were collaborations, there were partnerships happening where groups that were good at things like mobilizing volunteers were being supported by logistical groups that provided legal support, that were supported by groups that were engaged in strategic thinking, that were putting together bills and ideas for how we can change, how they could change voting rights and so on. That all of those things were coming together and they were working behind the scenes, sending volunteers down from New York City, from Philadelphia, many of them humanists, some of them Jewish Unitarians, sending them down to monitor polls, to organize folks in Selma, right? All of that was happening behind the scenes, not necessarily out in the open. And the irony of that, of course, is the segregationist government in those states called it things like a conspiracy. Sounds awfully familiar right now. Targeting of civil society groups, targeting of nonprofit organizations. And so what I can tell you right now is that in this moment, the we are civil society organizations, civil rights organizations that are partnering with each other, standing in solidarity with each other, defending each other from the lawfare that's happening where, the Southern Poverty Law Center is being targeted by the Department of Justice for trumped up charges, where people were in Ohio were being had their door kicked in and their offices raided because they were registering voters, being charged as, co-conspirators in a place like Minneapolis, where people in Texas were charged with conspiracy for handing out and having pamphlets. Standing up against that, making sure that we have explicit solidarity networks, that we have the resources we need to fight back, but also that we are engaged in the investing in the future for, okay, what comes next? That we're not just on the back heel defending ourselves, but also engaged in the planning for the future. But we have to do both, because if we just sort of entrench ourselves and say, well, we're just going to focus on what comes next, we're not going to push back, there are people that can't wait for us, they can't wait 2 years, they can't wait 4 years. There are people that, are being, if you had folks in this sanctuary that were undocumented immigrants, the policies of this Department of Justice, of the Department of Homeland Security, until a few years ago would say that they wouldn't come in here and arrest people. It was sensitive space. And they changed that. And so we as atheists, as members of the civil rights community, even though most of our groups don't have spaces like this, we said, no, those sort of spaces ought to be kind of off limits. And by the way, you should extend that to the groups like ours. So we're reimagining the structures of these things, thinking outside the box of, not everybody has a gathering space like this. Some people are gathering in their homes. Some religious groups just gather in homes. And so if those rights extend to faith groups, then they should extend to us. And so we put aside some of our big theological differences with religious groups to stand with them in protecting the dignity of our neighbors. And so the we is anyone who shares those core commitments, even if, and sometimes especially if, we don't see eye to eye on a bunch of other things. It's really powerful for us to stand together with each other in that moment. It's a really important part of that tough pluralism, that tough solidarity that I was talking about. Saw a question. Oh, there you are. You moved.
Yeah, a lot of this is theoretical, but I'm tired of being mistaken as the silent majority. And I'm looking for instructions from you, from anywhere. I'm picketing every Saturday morning. I'm picketing when there's a call out. I want to know, other than I feel like an ATM for all those charities. And so I am tired of being an ATM. I am tired of writing every day to my senators and congressmen that already agree with me. What am I supposed to do, boss?
Well, and so that's an important, a vital, absolutely crucial question is, and people need to know what's the best way to get involved. And it sucks, it's tough when you feel that what you're doing either isn't enough, or that you're not being given clear instructions on where to best help out, or that there's not a good outlet for what you're feeling that you need to do right this moment. And so what I tell people to do, what I encourage people to do, is do the things that you are capable of doing and then go that you're comfortable with, because not everybody is able to give money, not everybody is able to get out there and stand on a picket line, right? But some of us are. And so do what you're comfortable doing and then go one step further to kind of push on that edge. Expand out what is possible for yourself. Key things, we don't ever want you to feel like an ATM because you feel taken advantage of, right? One of the big things that I really encourage folks to do is to deepen their engagement with those other communities. Don't just show up for the pickets, but show up for the organizing. Show up for the planning meetings ahead of time. Talk about the things, talk with them about what's happening down the road. What are some of the things that they need to make their work even more effective? Everybody's got additional skills beyond standing there with a sign, beyond writing a check, right? Most people do, I think. I'm sure you do. And so is it that you are great at graphics? You can make signs, you can do the designs that are going to be held up in the pickets. Is it that you are a heck of a spreadsheet organizer and you can arrange the call out sheet to make sure that folks know, hey, we just spotted ICE over here and we've got a call out sheet? Is it making sure that, wait a second, this government meeting keeps happening on days where not everybody can be here because you keep scheduling them at a time that is not great for our Jewish neighbors? This is a very real example that has happened, and someone speaks up. Is it that, hey, wait a second, this meeting is only happening in English and we've got neighbors who speak Spanish and don't understand what's happening? Is it that your school board is just sort of floating along, not acting like anything is the matter, and they need somebody to give them a little shove on teaching real democracy, talking about our actual history, showing up for those meetings? And so, yeah, sometimes it very much is you show up to the same things over and over and over again to build relationships, to deepen those ties. So it's not just, oh, I'm showing up at a picket, and I don't want to minimize the importance of that because, like somebody like me, I just turned 40, but I'm big guy. I can stand on a picket line and be kind of intimidating, but that's not, and I'm not going to demand that everybody do that. Not everybody has the ability to do that. Not everybody, is able-bodied like me, right? Like can do that sort of thing. But just like the civil rights era, 1950s, 1960s, there were people back in New York, in Baltimore, that were on the phones arranging legal counsel, that were working the phones to make sure that the people that were going there to engage in peaceful physical resistance, the people that were engaged in civil disobedience, that they had a lawyer. And it takes all of that. So yes, it does take money, and that's the annoying reality of this. We do not have, I sort of jokingly refer to them, we don't have billionaire sugar daddies that are willing to just throw money at us. But what we also don't want to do is make people feel like they're just being an ATM having numbers punched in. But if you have the capacity to give in that way, fantastic. I hope you'll continue to do that. I hope you'll support groups that are engaged in the work that you find valuable, and understand that they are working behind the scenes as well. But crucially, your most valuable resource is your time. And if you feel that you're not getting as much out of showing up to pickets, maybe there's an organizing event, maybe there's the behind the scenes thing, the planning that can happen that would be a better use of your skills. Just one brief anecdote on that. One of the volunteers that we've worked with was somebody who did like logistics for a giant company, like shipping and stuff, right? And they're not big on getting out there and like holding a picket sign, standing in the heat. But what they are really, really good at is putting together color-coded spreadsheets where everybody knows what their job is on the day that an event is happening. They know, and they can do the call-out sheet, and they can pick up the phone real quick and figure something out. That is just as crucial as the person writing the check, just as crucial as the person going out there, standing on the picket line, and just as crucial as the person giving the speech. And so don't ever think that what you're doing isn't enough. Don't have despair in that moment. But that's the annoying answer to that, is that it depends on the place you live in, and the needs of your community better than I could ever do it. What I would suggest is find people that share your values and be really engaged with that.
I've got a question.
By all means.
It seems to me that we're talking about kind of shifting the narrative.
Yep.
I grew up Roman Catholic. I'm atheist, humanist now. I was just visiting family back east. They're still pretty Catholic back there. And it's like I need coaching on how do I talk to them? Because I think they could be allies but they're kind of buying into this Christian nationalism thing. Yeah. And I just kind of go like, what do I say? The relationship matters to me.
Yeah.
How is there coaching available for how to engage positively in these conversations?
Yeah.
Because if we're all talking, we all know people who are still believers in this.
Yeah.
That could be a wonderful place where we could make a difference.
Yeah. So let me give you an anecdote about this. Who's heard of CPAC, Conservative Political Action Conference? Yeah. So one of the first things I did working with American Atheists is went to CPAC with American Atheists. And the reason that we did it, and this was before the era of Trump, this was like 2014-ish, the reason that we went wasn't because it was like, oh, actually, we're conservative or something like that. It was, if you genuinely care about the things that you say you care about, thinking back to like first principles, moving up a level of abstraction, moving up to the 30,000-foot level and so on, just like with your family, just like with the folks that you have relationships with who might be a little Christian nationalist curious, is asking them about the things that matter to them. Getting to that sort of root question, asking those questions, like where do we find some common ground here? Where we found common ground, and where I found common ground with people that I share basically nothing in common with on like policy prescriptions. I'm not a conservative. I worked in the 2008 election, getting Obama elected. That was my first thing. But what I asked them was, you say you care a lot about small government, about the government not imposing its will on you, about you genuinely believe that the best government is a government that sort of gets out of your way. Fine. What is bigger government? What is more of an intrusion into your personal liberty than a government that tells you what you can believe, that makes the decisions for your family about what they're going to instruct your children on matters of religion? It's not a neutrality. What they're advocating for is a very specific version of big government telling you what to believe. And for people who really took it seriously, people who genuinely believed that they wanted a smaller government, they believed in that sort of personal liberty, they said, I never really thought about it that way. I thought you guys were just sort of like raging Marxist something, whatever. But when you put it that way, when you say, the government putting its thumb on the scale in the marketplace of ideas and deciding which religion is going to get government support, I hadn't really thought about it that way. And so a lot of it was just asking them and hearing them out with an open mind, what are the things that you care about? And kind of keep going one level of abstraction further and further back until you find that kernel of something you can agree on. And we ran into this with talking with school boards. I'll give you another sort of anecdote here. Talking with school boards about medically accurate, science-based sex education. And there is nothing in this world, very few things in this world, that get ultra-conservative, Christian, theological, whatever, up in arms more than, sex and schools and kids, right? Like they freak out about it. And what we said is, we all agree here. What we care about is what's best for kids. And you say that you want what's best for your kids, that you don't want them, making a bad choice. You don't want whatever the terminology might be. But ultimately, the level of abstraction that worked for some of those school boards was, we want what's best for our kids. Well, what the data shows, what we have every indication of, is that when kids have the ability to make an informed decision, meaning they understand what consent is, that we're teaching sex education that includes the importance and an emphasis on consent, that includes, here's how contraception works. If you care about reducing the number of abortions, then the best way to do that is to teach kids what contraception is. Whether it's condom use, whether it's, whatever version. If you care about that, and I think you do, I think you're genuine in that moment of connection, right? Where we're not talking down to them, we're genuinely trying to make a connection with somebody that we disagree with. We want what's best for our kids. You want to reduce the number of abortions. I don't want kids having to have medical procedures either. What I would rather have happen is for them to be able to make an informed decision and have control and agency over themselves. And the best way for us to do that, based on all the data we have, is this. And it's not just the data, though. Sometimes it's a personal story. And when we talk as atheists, as humanists, about being really data-driven, this is something that I always kind of go back to, is if we are genuine about that with ourselves, if we're honest with ourselves about wanting to go where the data tells us, we have to acknowledge that we can't always just lead with the data. Sometimes we have to lead with the emotional, the stories, the personal anecdotes, because that connects better than big numbers, faceless details, etc. The personal stories. So telling about, a kid who, telling someone about, my personal story as an adopted kid. I was adopted as a baby. My birth mother, when I was born, was 16. Now, she got pregnant in part because she was at a religious school, didn't really teach too much about contraception, and her parents said, well, you can have, you're welcome to make your own choice. You can either put this child up for adoption and then, move forward and get on with your life, or you can have the baby, but you won't be having him in our house. That was the choice that she was faced with. And I don't want anybody to have to go through that anguish that my birth mother did. I mean, I was adopted and my parents loved me very much, but my birth mother went through just an unspeakable amount of grief in navigating that moment, and I don't want anybody to have to do that. I don't want anyone to have to, at the age of 16, make that decision. And if she had had the resources to make an informed decision about how she wanted to move forward with with access to resources, maybe she would have made a different decision. Those personal anecdotes matter because they humanize the challenges that we're facing. It's easy to abstract away the struggle. It's easy to say, well, this is a Christian nation, if you don't see how where the rubber meets the road, how that actually impacts real people. Do you mean that Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus and Jews don't get a vote? Do you mean that we're turning them away as citizens? Do you mean this person right here, my neighbor, my friend, my loved one, that they are not entitled to the same promise of American citizenship as the rest of us? And having people telling those stories by having relationships with our friends, our community members who are Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, Sikh. Sometimes we're not the best messenger for these things. We're not always the person to lead, right? And so just being cognizant of who's doing the storytelling is also really important. Hi, Kurt.
One of the things you said earlier is that we don't have any sugar daddies on our side.
That's true.
And I think that's a real problem. I think that we should try to find ways that we can show the people who are on our side that it's to their financial advantage to do what we like. Mm-hmm. In other words, for instance, some of the Central Valley farmers, to show them that it's to their advantage to go with us to try to allow the workers that they depend on mm-hmm. to be there.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who are on the opposite side, if you like, who take big advantage from being able to do defense industries or oil or something like that.
Sure.
I think we have to try really hard to find ways that it's to the financial advantage of other people to be on our side.
Yeah. And I think, so the point I was raising about sort of the billionaire sugar daddies that are propping up the Christian nationalist movement, this is an important part of it that I think kind of gets lost sometimes. None of their movement is organic. A lot of it is astroturfed. People know what astroturfing is, where you have sort of the fake grassroots, right? It's fake. But it's expensive. It doesn't grow organically like actual grass does. It's sort of laid down by somebody with money. There's a lot of that out there, and it's incredibly frustrating for people to see that, where we don't have people writing giant checks to media that is doing actual independent journalism. In fact, we have right now. Think about your social media. Think about the apps that are on your phone in your pocket right now. If you are somebody who uses Facebook, if you are somebody who uses X, formerly Twitter, if you are somebody who uses Instagram, TikTok, those are all owned by like 3 billionaires. Those aren't just owned by, some giant faceless corporation. They're owned literally by 3 billionaires. TikTok is controlled by Larry Ellison, whose son now controls CBS News. Facebook, Meta, is owned and controlled largely by Mark Zuckerberg, right? X, owned by the richest man in the world, and remade it in the vision that he had. And so when I'm talking about like the sugar daddies, they're totally happy to throw $100 million at something and let it sit for years. Fox News was literally a project that was not intended initially to make money. It was because they were like, well, we really just need our own media ecosystem because this sort of fact-based ecosystem isn't really good for us. But your broader point about demonstrating to folks that like the economic side of this is important too, that people invest in America when we follow the law, when they don't have to worry about their factories getting raided, and people who have work permits, work visas, are getting rounded up and detained, like what happened in one of the Carolinas, I think, with it was like a Hyundai or Kia plant. It was a diplomatic incident because the Korean government was really pissed off that the Trump Homeland Security kicked the doors in and detained a bunch of people that were working legally in the US. And it's like I said with immigrants, it's not just, we don't want to just reduce it to the mere economics of it, but it is a part of the argument that we should absolutely make is these are folks that are contributing to America and being just productive members of society in just the same way that the rest of us are. These are people who get up every morning, go do work that maybe you don't want to do, and are working hard to put food on the table. And we should absolutely celebrate that and acknowledge that. My broader point was about the people that are willing to kind of write those gazillion-dollar checks. If any of you are a billionaire in this room, by the way, certainly don't hesitate to let me know. I hope that I've maybe spurned something in terms of, maybe don't demand like quarterly reports on things, give us a few years to get things rolling. But if not, that's fine too. If you know a billionaire, I'm happy to give you my card and we can pass that along. But that's a real struggle, that we live in a country where we have such profound economic disparity. And as I said, $100 million to Elon Musk is not a whole lot. I mean, we're talking about, 100 million, a billion, 10 billion, 100 billion, a trillion, 4 orders of magnitude, So if you've got 100 grand in the bank, it's the equivalent of what, $10, $100? That's a tough nut to crack. And it's a really challenging position that we find ourselves in. But again, they're spending all this money and they're still only fighting to like a narrow win or a draw, and they lose sometimes, and they're spending all this money. I think it speaks to just, again, the profound unpopularity of the things, the project that they're engaged in. That people look at it and go, oh my God, this is horrifying. That when people see Elon Musk tweeting out, white genocide rhetoric or inciting pogroms in the UK, they are rightly horrified by it. And it really, speaks to the fact that money isn't everything, but, and this goes to your point about feeling like an ATM, money is something, but it's not everything. That we're able to get a lot done because we're out organizing them, we're hard scrabble, we're willing to actually put in real work. But that organic work takes a lot longer than the inorganic astroturfing does. Just think about, to extend the metaphor to its breaking point, how long does it take to grow an actual lawn? A really nice, healthy lawn. It takes a while. How long does it take to put down one of those sort of horrifying, green carpets that you can buy from Home Depot? Well, it takes as long as it took you to go to Home Depot and roll it out. And that's the difference. And so we're actually growing a real lawn here. They're just putting out this green carpet. And it's a lot easier for them, but it's not what anybody actually wants.
Another question that occurred to me. American Atheist, are you involved in any legal activity, legal action? Do you have a legal arm? What are you working on?
Sure. So the answer is yes. We have moved. So people think of American Atheists as, and sort of the origin story of American Atheists was this Supreme Court case, 1963, that took mandatory Bible readings out of public schools. And so people have this conception of American Atheists as sort of doing these lawsuits. We still do litigation around these sort of big issues, but what we try to do is have them tie directly into our other programmatic areas. In recent years, a big kind of idea of mine and that we pivoted on in 2018, 2019, was moving toward state policy, recognizing that in Washington, D.C., not a lot actually happens, not a lot actually gets done. Laws don't pass. We pass like one bill a year, and then the House spends the rest of its time sort of squabbling, and the Senate just confirms a bunch of judges, and then we do an election, and then we do it all over again. Instead, what's happening in a lot of states is the things that are the government that is closest to us is actually getting a lot of stuff done. So, for example, in Colorado, we passed a bill that is called the Healthcare Transparency Act that requires, big issue that I think a lot of folks deal with all over this country is the fact that in too many states, you don't have access to a health care provider, hospital, primary care network, that is not owned and operated by a religious entity. In this country, something between 1/4 and 1/3 of all hospital beds in the US are run by either the Catholic Church or Lutheran group or some Baptists. And what that means is that their faith directives trump medical necessity. That if you are in a Catholic hospital and you are experiencing, you just had a baby, and you say, all right, I've had my 4th baby, I am done. I would like a tubal ligation, please. Totally fine, like that, and that's the time to do it, is right after you've had a baby. And they will say, no. They will say, nope, you need to go away and go find someone else to do it, because we will not do it. Or if you are experiencing complications in pregnancy and it is determined that the pregnancy is not viable, they will not perform a dilation and extraction and abortion, even for a pregnancy that is no longer viable, because their faith directives trump your health. And now we're seeing that kind of put into practice, not just in religious hospitals, but in all hospitals in places that have banned abortion, where women are going in, experiencing complications in pregnancy, losing a wanted pregnancy, and desperately needing medical intervention, but sitting in the parking lot until they are gravely ill enough, they are septic, they are bleeding enough to require immediate medical intervention because their life is at risk. When they could have just come in and said, listen, this pregnancy is no longer viable, I'm so sorry, we're gonna terminate this pregnancy right now so that you don't have these horrible health complications, you don't have to go through the anguish of this because this is not a viable pregnancy. They won't do that because they are terrified of being charged with murder. And so what American Atheists has done over the last 6-7 years is pivot into working at the state level. So we have what we call SATs, our state advocacy teams, that are working to elevate the perspectives, elevate the work, elevate the values of our community, and get people an on-ramp into state level policy work so that they have and can form relationships with members of their state legislature so they know who we are and we can engage with them. And so on the legal front, we've done that now with healthcare transparency, we've done it with substance use treatment program options. So some people are required to do 12-stepping. 12-stepping, if you aren't familiar with it, is ultimately a quasi-religious, you have to admit you're powerless without God and so on. But the law says that you can have a different option. You don't have to do the religious thing because it is so religious, so pervasively religious in the language of the courts. And so what we've done is file lawsuits that feed directly into the policies, the state policies that we're working on. So we did one in West Virginia that we filed a case for a prisoner who was on a non-determinated sentence. So he was sentenced to between 1 and 5 years, which is a hell of a wide span of time. But he was basically stuck in jail, stuck in prison, because he refused to participate in a religious substance use treatment program. And this is somebody who did a secular option before going to jail, and then wanted to continue it while in jail, and started to initially, and then the prison said, no, you have to do this religious one. And this was a religious one, by the way, that was being directly funded by the federal government against the rules of the grant. And so we sued, we went through all of the hoops for that. We won that case, and right when we won, the judge said, you can't require him to do this, and within a week he was released. And he spent almost 2 extra years in jail, because this was the only thing left for him to do, was complete this course. And he fought it, and he won, but it cost him 2 years of his life. And so we can point to that now when we go to state legislators and we have a personal story, we have a person we can point to, we have a problem that we can solve by saying, Governor Kathy Hochul in New York, this is a problem that keeps happening, it's happening here in New York, it's happening in these other states, we want to fix it, and here's the solution. And it gets people excited and active and willing to do it, and it's something that, by the way, isn't partisan. People don't look at this and go, oh, this is, the crazy atheists, the Marxist atheists are coming for us again. This is a common sense solution that shows that we're serious about solving problems. Same thing is true for child marriage. Something that I'm really proud that we've taken a leadership role on is ending child marriage in the US. We've been working with a group called Unchained at Last since 2019 to pass laws at the state level, working state by state by state, to set the age limit for marriage at 18 with no exceptions. Oklahoma just passed a law setting the marriage age limit at 18 earlier this year. California has not. California is one of the few states that has no lower limit for getting married. So if you are a 14-year-old child, you can still get married off. Generally, it's a young girl getting married off to an older man, generally because of a religious thing, with parental permission. And they say, well, that's probably fine. You have parental permission. And so we passed this in Oklahoma, and what happened because of that is the advocates we were working with here in California said, hey, wait a second. If Oklahoma can pass this, what are we doing here in California? Get with the program. And so it's not just, what are the lawsuits on, but how do we change the law? So we're not just defending what's already there. We're working to move the law in a positive direction. And then the last thing about this that I think is important is building these relationships with folks in the legal academy. Some of the ideas around like the history and tradition test that they replaced the Lemon test. I think that folks know Lemon Supreme Court decision, three-pronged test, has to have a secular purpose, can't entangle religion and government, and so on, thrown out by the Supreme Court and replaced with the history and tradition test. That didn't just come out of nowhere. That came from right-wing Christian nationalist legal groups working with the Legal Academy to create something new. And so again, you may not see, oh, are you filing a lawsuit about this, or you whatever. We have to do the legwork first to develop the new, whatever the new thing is. Develop cases, work with people to build those cases from scratch. The case, the Colorado cake case, the case in Washington with the praying coach, all of these were created from scratch. They weren't just, oh, this fell into our lap and we're going to sue over it. These were orchestrated from the get-go. And one of the frustrations about this is I almost feel like a conspiracy theorist sometimes, the way we have to talk about these, of like, they planned this from the get-go. None of this is organic. They manufacture it from scratch. And you feel like you're standing in front of the pin board with the red twine going back and forth, like it's all connected, but it actually is. So what are we doing on the legal front? It's feeding directly into the state level policy work that we're doing. We're not just defending stuff that's already there, because as I said, if we do that, we just chip it away more slowly. We have to innovate, we have to move the ball forward. Yes, sir.
I'm very concerned about something that you raised in your answer to the previous question, the consolidation of media power in the hands of oligarchs.
Yeah, like 5 people.
That are allied with Trump.
Yep.
It's just astonishing to me that how many of them have happened, how few legitimate news sources are left that are not under the control of allies of Trump. And I'm wondering if there's anything that American Atheists can do, or Reimagining America. I know the state attorney generals are looking at the merger between Paramount and Warner Brothers.
Yep.
But can you comment on what might be done about this incredibly dangerous concentration of power?
Yeah, so what is American Atheists doing about it? I'll answer that question first because it's a shorter answer. It's not something that we have a lot of expertise in. And so what we're doing is deferring to and elevating the concerns and the work that our allies and sort of the pro-democracy movement are doing, but sort of letting them lead on it and hearing out and acknowledging where things like, to give a good example here, the Supreme Court, the Trump administration, all these folks, they view, when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? When the only tool that we have available to us right now is religious liberty style things, sometimes we have to make an argument that we're kind of uncomfortable with as atheists. That, like, we're a religion, like not collecting stamps as a hobby, right? That sort of joke. But we're protected under the Constitution by many of the same principles. And one of the areas that can happen there is, are atheists being unfairly discriminated against? Are we being shut out of these discussions? It's not so much a common thing with the media consolidation, but it is something that we are elevating that does happen from time to time, where, the dominant narrative ends up being one of Christian privilege or whatever. On the Reimagining America front, as we're thinking about like the bigger question here, it does become, okay, what does a functioning media ecosystem look like? Well, we don't have to just work with the laws that we have today. I think many people rightly are really concerned about this. And what are some tools that we have available to us? Well, we have the ability to pass new laws that prevent media consolidation through antitrust and a more robust antitrust set of laws. But it requires passing new laws. A lot of the laws that have been, that we engage in antitrust enforcement with nowadays are, artifacts of the 1950s, 1930s even in some cases. A lot of them date back that far. And so when we're talking about how we better enforce this, one of the options is you pass a new law. And that's ultimately really unsatisfying. Like very few people get like really excited and animated by antitrust law. That's not the sort of thing that I think a lot of people are turning out to protest on, or that's winning a lot of votes. But framing it in terms of corruption, talking about how the billionaires, the oligarchs are using this to corrupt our democracy, that they themselves are corrupt, they're lining their own pockets and so on. We have to be comfortable sort of framing some of these issues in those stark terms, and being willing as a community to go out there and advocate for these things. So is American Atheists going to have a policy prescription for what a new law might look like? No, probably not, because we're not experts on this. But what we will do is encourage all of our groups, all of our affiliates, all of our members to get plugged in with people that do have that expertise. And to do it in a way where you show up and you say, hi, I'm Judith from the Humanists of Santa Barbara, and I really care about this issue. And then the person that is standing there at that government meeting is going to say, oh, humanists, what is that? In much the same way that these groups, that religious groups will say, I'm from the local Catholic Church, I'm from the local Methodist Church. They don't spend any moment thinking about, well, does the Methodist Church have a position on whether or not there should be a bus stop here? Or whether we should build a food pantry here? Or what antitrust looks like? Or what the tax rate should be? No. They go there and they say that they're part of this community because it says something about who they are, it says something about their values, it says that they're connected to this community. And so by doing that, you normalize your participation in our democracy, you raise the visibility of this community, of the community that you're a part of, and you normalize and you say, wait, there's some people over here who I didn't know existed who might be on my side. And then other groups reach out and you build these sort of networks of solidarity, this cross-pollination that grows your group, that strengthens and makes your group more resilient, more vibrant for the long term. So that's what we always encourage people to do, is to get more involved and to be really outspoken about your affiliation with this community, whether or not it is germane in the moment necessarily. You're not doing religious stuff, you're talking about antitrust, but it matters. It does still matter because there's still a lot of stigma, there's still a lot of discrimination that atheists, humanists, the non-religious face in this country.
Great. Thank you. And with that, really, thank you for coming here today, even though it's Santa Barbara and it's wonderful. Okay, we appreciate you taking the time and sharing this with us. So
thank you, everybody.
Really appreciate that.
Really, really a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.